This video is going to cover the replacement of the rear brake foot lever pedal from the stock Harley one to the Kuryakyn extended and lowered foot pedal that Kuryakyn has been selling. The instructions are fairly basic. You take off the foot pedal, the foot pad, and then you, after disconnecting that, you're supposed to pull the pin out on the back side, slide this off, slide the new one on, put this back on, bada boom, bada bing. However, after looking at several YouTube videos online, they indicate it's not going to be quite so simple. Because of conflicts with various bits and pieces, mainly the front engine guard or possibly this lower fairing. I'm hoping that I won't have to take this off, but if I do, it is not covered in the installation instructions from Kuryakyn, even though they say that this particular model number will fit on a bike with the hard lowers, which is, my bike is a 2011 Road Glide Ultra. So we shall see, and we'll try to document it as we go along through this video. So after doing a bit of a dry fit to see how this new curved lever is going to fit into this thing, I'm going to deviate from the Kuryakyn instructions, and based on what I saw on some YouTube channels, I'm going to remove the front footboard mount and then disconnect the rear footboard from its rear mount here and then up here, and take the whole mount out, because that'll free up this entire arc of movement. Because part of the problem with getting this new one in is that because it bends lower, it tends to conflict with this as you're trying to slide it onto the shaft to then re-engage it with the the rear brake master cylinder, which is right up under here. Okay, so again, I'm going to deviate from the instructions and see how that works for my very first step of doing this thing. I've removed the rear footboard mounting bolt, which was a 3/16 hex bit on the rear side and a 7/16 nut on the front side. So the front footboard mounting bracket mounts to the frame with a bolt that has a 5/16 hex nut on the outside and a 9/16 lock nut on the back side to hold it onto the frame at that point right there. So we are now about as cleared out as we're going to get, and we can start working on removal of the cotter pin, which is located behind the exhaust pipe back here, right up underneath here, and that attaches to the rear master cylinder, which is here. And once you disconnect that, we'll take that nut off and do the slide and wobble routine to pull this whole thing right off. And of course that will be the easy part. Getting the other one on there is where everybody seems to have an issue with conflict between stuff like this and the engine guard. So we'll see what it looks like once I get this part done. Okay? Once you get the footboard removed, you need to get back behind your exhaust pipe and find that cotter pin that goes through the connecting pin that connects the linkage from your brake pedal to your rear brake master cylinder. Now getting to this is really not easy. You've got to kind of poke up and around and between things to get access to it, but that's really the only way to get to it and pull that cotter pin out, so you can then remove the connecting pin, which will be the next step in removing that rear brake pedal from the bike. To remove the cotter pin, this little sucker right here, I used the flat tip screwdriver and worked my way up underneath the exhaust pipe and got to where the pin was at, slowly bent the tips up until they got straightened out. The end of the cotter pin was pointing downward, and of course you may be able to see, but it has a small eyelet in the end of it. Sorry. I used that eyelet by pulling on it with a pick that I had bent into this hook shape, and by pulling downward it drew it out of the pin, which is right here. Now it came out of the opposite side. Then to pull this pin out farther, used needle nose pliers to work at it from the back side, push it through here, and then I'll go ahead and remove it the rest of the way out, and that'll free the pedal from the rear brake cylinder's plunger and allow me to move on to the next step of removal. Once you pull the pin out, you can see the hole in the end where the cotter pin goes through. You also want to make sure you hang on to that little flat washer, because it's got to go back on the end of this pin after you reinstall it. And then they do provide a brand new little cotter pin to put through this hole in the end here, and to secure it for future use after you swap out the brake pedal. You do not want to reuse that cotter pin that you pulled out. It's pretty thin, and anytime you bend those, if you go back and use it again, there's a possibility it's going to break and not do its job. So always use a new cotter pin. Okay, 5/8 socket to remove the nut. It didn't take that much to take it off pressure wise, so pull that, pull your flat washer, and now you're ready to start removing your rear brake pedal. Rotating it back should allow you to remove it somehow, some way. So, in the course of trying to figure out how to remove the original brake lever, the only way to clear it and get it out from behind the exhaust pipe is going to be removing this rear floorboard mount, which I hoped to not have to do. So I'm going to go ahead and remove it now, which should allow me to rotate this brake pedal all the way around to the rear, which will then allow me to slide this ear back here out from under the exhaust pipe and slide it completely off the shaft. Theoretically, reinstallation should be just as easy. We'll find out when we put the new one on. Okay, so the rear floorboard mount has now been removed using a 5/16 hex head to remove the mounting bolt, and it would appear that once you rotate the brake lever past that point where the floorboard was mounted, it'll rotate back and slide right off. So we've got the old one off. Now let's see if we can get the new one on without any more acrobatics. Well, boys and girls, ladies and germs, I have apparently discovered why so many people have such an issue putting these things back on with the new ones. If you'll notice, there's this dog leg in the stock rear brake pedal. Now that dog leg allows this section of the brake pedal to clear the exhaust pipe. So when you rotate this back towards the rear, that offset allows it to clear the exhaust pipe right in through here, and then allows it to completely slide off the shaft up here. The Kuryakyn version, I can only assume in the interest of manufacturing simplicity, is simply a straight piece. Okay? So when you slide this on, this end first, over this shaft, and then try to rotate it around, it rubs up against the exhaust pipe before the ear can clear the back side of the exhaust pipe. Let me show you if I can. All right, here we go. Here's the stock pipe with its offset, or the stock. Here's the stock rear pedal with its offset. You slide it over the shaft with the ear down behind the exhaust pipe. It gets to this point, now you can rotate it up and over to the position that lets you connect it to your rear brake master cylinder linkage. So again, the offset allows it to clear. You can slide it right off. Kuryakyn's, without the bend, goes over the shaft. It hits against the exhaust pipe, and as you rotate up, bunk, it now hits on the very back side of the exhaust pipe. Now, a lot of other folks have tried to go at it from the front side, I guess, by putting it in like this. But of course that impacts your engine guard. So they wind up removing the engine guard so you can continue rotating it upward and then slide it behind the exhaust pipe. I'm going to try something different. Again, not covered in the Kuryakyn instructions, but I'm going to try removing this outer exhaust pipe cover, the front section. Theoretically, it won't be too big of a problem. Once I get it off, I think it will allow me enough clearance for this brake lever to slide on, ride up against the exhaust pipe itself, and then rotate past this point and get onto the shaft and in position to lock, get connected on with your rear cylinder, master cylinder. Okay? Anyway, that's the hope. That's what I'm going to do next. I'll let you know how that went in a little while. All right, boys and girls, ladies and germs, here's the deal. I'm happy to report that by removing the exhaust trim piece, it does give me enough clearance to rotate and install this new extended brake pedal onto my rear brake. So if you're getting ready to do this, be prepared to pull that off. If you're dealing with that particular clearance issue. To me, that's a whole lot easier than pulling off the entire engine guard, as I have seen some other folks do. Others have also suggested removing these two screws here, taking the entire rear brake cylinder off the frame, moving it forward, and then giving you better clearance to install your pin and your cotter key. However, because of my lowers, that's really not going to do me much good. So I'm going to elect to not do that and just deal with the access problem of getting back behind there to reinsert the cotter pin in that linkage pin. And I don't think it's going to be that big a problem. So I'm, like I said, much happier with that, taking off the outer cover versus removing engine guard. So that's my 2 cents worth, and it seemed to work pretty well. Hope this helped you, and once I get it reinstalled, I'll put together a final picture. One thing I want to mention before I install this is Kuryakyn gives you a grease fitting, which is great, but make sure before you install it that you check the tightness, because I found the grease fitting on mine when it came out of the package was barely finger tight, and I have no doubt that had I not checked that and tightened it down, I could have wound up with that thing just rattling itself right out pretty quickly. So please make sure you check that before you do your installation. Also, you need to grease up that shaft prior to installing it as well with some anti-seize. Just a recommendation that they make in the instructions. Make a note of the fact that the pin that goes through the ears on this new rear brake pedal and through the linkage to your rear master cylinder, there are some little shoulders, or a shoulder along the edge right at the head, and this is to ensure it's a good snug fit. Now when you're putting this pin in, and you have to basically tap it in to its full insertion before you can put in your little cotter pin through this hole. If you tap it in with the holes off to one side or the other, or even horizontal, you're not going to be able to see them very well from the top when you're trying to reinsert your cotter pin to secure the end of this as the end of your installation. So just a word of caution to make sure you put this in where those holes are vertical and visible, so that you can slide the cotter pin in from the bottom, which is what I'm going to do. Slide the cotter pin in through the hole from the bottom, and then that gives you access to bend the ears down on either side from the top, which is the easiest access to the cotter pin. Okay? Just pointing that out. Okay, so maybe difficult to see, but I've got the pin about halfway in. It's just bound up about, a little bit, but it's only about halfway in. So I've still got access to the head if I need to pull it back out to realign the pin. But I was fortunate enough that I put it in just exactly the way I wanted to, so that I can get a straight up and down hole, so I can reinstall the cotter pin from the bottom and then bend the ears over at the top. But my caution here is that you can, or my info is that you can reinsert this pin, try to make sure you've got it lined up with the holes vertical. If you mess it up, you've got enough of the exposed head from the other side that you can pop it back out. Because once you jam it in there all the way, it makes it harder to take it back out. So it might save you a little trouble if you just tap it in a little ways till it starts to poke out the other side, then check the alignment of the hole before you finish driving it all the way home. Alright, by using a pair of needle nose to hold the loop end of the cotter pin, I was able to gently work it up in through the head of the pin, or the end of the pin, I'm sorry. Do not forget to put that little washer back on that pin after you fully insert it through the linkage and get it out the other side. I almost forgot that, but saw it laying there in my parts pile, so don't forget to put that little washer back on the end of that pin before you put in the cotter pin. And there we have it, fully installed. As you can see, it shows a much flatter position for your foot pad, and I've already taken it out for a test drive and it's like night and day. So again, this is the Kuryakyn 1071 extended girder style, and for 90 bucks and a little time to put it on, it is worth every penny. So hope this video has helped you, and ride safe out there.